The whistle of the wind through the canyon carried a sound that made James Yates pull his horse to a stop, something between a child's cry and the creak of rusted metal that set every instinct on edge. The year was 1885, and the Arizona Territory near Red Bluff stretched out in endless waves of red rock and scrub brush, a landscape that could hide 1,000 secrets or kill a man in a dozen different ways. James had been trailing a wayward calf from his ranch when the sound reached him, echoing off the canyon walls in a way that made it impossible to ignore. He was 26 years old, weathered beyond his years by the harsh sun and harder work, with calloused hands that knew both the tenderness required to birth a foal and the strength needed to wrestle a steer to the ground. The abandoned railroad spur had been there for 3 years now, left behind when the mining company went bust, and the dreams of connecting Red Bluff to the southern rail lines died with it. Most folks avoided the area, considering it bad luck or worse, but James had never been one for superstition. Still, as he guided his buckskin mare toward the rusted rails that disappeared into the rocks, he felt an uneasiness settle in his gut. The caboose sat tilted on the tracks, its red paint faded to a dusty pink by years of sun and sandstorms. One side listed where the rail bed had given way, and the windows were so covered in dust they looked like blind eyes staring out at nothing. James dismounted, his hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip, though he could not have said what threat he expected to find in an abandoned train car miles from anywhere. The cry came again, definitely a child this time, high and plaintive. James quickened his pace, his boots crunching on the gravel between the ties. The door of the caboose hung partially open, wedged that way by sand that had drifted against it. He pulled it wider, the hinges screaming in protest, and stepped into the dim interior. The woman lay on a makeshift bed of what looked like old mail sacks, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, despite the coolness of the shaded car. She tried to sit up when James entered, her hand moving protectively to the bundle beside her, but the effort seemed to cost her everything. She fell back with a gasp, her face pale as milk except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks. The child, a little girl of perhaps 3 years old, stood in the corner clutching a rag doll that had seen better days. Her eyes were huge in her small face, dark and watchful, and she did not make a sound now that someone had come, as if she had learned that silence might mean safety. "Madam," James said softly, keeping his voice gentle as he would with a spooked horse. "My name is James Yates. I have a ranch not far from here. You are hurt." The woman's eyes focused on him with difficulty. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 24 or 25, with delicate features that spoke of a life that should have known better than this desperate situation. Her dress, though torn and stained now, had once been of good quality, the kind of thing a respectable woman would wear to church or to town. "Water," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, my daughter." James had his canteen out in an instant, kneeling beside her to help her drink. She took small sips at first, then tried to gulp it down until he gently pulled it away. "Not too fast, madam. It will make you sick." He turned to the little girl who had not moved from her corner. "Are you thirsty, sweetheart?" She nodded just once, but did not come forward. James set the canteen on the floor and slid it toward her, giving her space. She darted forward quick as a jackrabbit, grabbed it, and retreated to her corner to drink. "How long have you been here?" James asked the woman, already knowing the answer could not be good. 3 days, maybe 4. She closed her eyes, and James could see the effort it took for her to speak. "We were traveling to Silver City. My husband's cousin lives there. The stage was attacked. Bandits. They killed the driver and the guard, Shot the horses. My husband tried to fight them." She did not need to finish the sentence. James could see the weight of that loss in the way her hand clutched at the fabric of her dress, in the tight lines around her mouth. "They took everything. Left us in the desert. I walked. Carried Hannah until I could not carry her any more. Then I saw this place. Thought we could wait here, that someone might come." "Someone has come now," James said firmly. "I am going to get you both out of here. Can you ride?" She shook her head weakly. "I do not think I can even stand." James looked at her more carefully, noting the way she held one arm close to her body, the odd angle of her ankle. Broken or badly sprained at the very least. Add to that the fever and dehydration, and it was a wonder she was conscious at all. "All right then. I will make a travois. It is going to be a rough ride, but I will get you home." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I do not have any money to pay you. They took everything. Did I ask for payment?" James kept his voice gruff to cover the surge of emotion he felt looking at this woman and her daughter, alone and helpless in the wilderness. "You just rest now. Save your strength." He stood and turned to the little girl, who was watching him with those enormous dark eyes. "Hannah, is that your name?" Another small nod. "That is a pretty name. I am going to help your mama, all right. We are going to take you somewhere safe and warm with plenty of food and water. Would you like that?" For the first time, something sparked in the child's eyes. "Food." "All you can eat," James promised. "But I need you to be brave a little while longer. Can you do that?" She nodded again, and this time she came forward willingly when he held out his hand. Her small fingers felt like bird bones in his large palm, delicate and fragile. It made something fierce and protective rise up in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced quite this way before. Working quickly, James used rope from his saddle bags and branches from a nearby mesquite to construct a crude travois that he could drag behind his horse. The woman watched him work, and he caught her studying his face when she thought he was not looking. "I am Harriet Morrow," she said finally. "Mrs. Harriet Morrow, and you have my deepest gratitude, Mr. Yates." "James is fine," he said, testing the knots on the travois. "And you can thank me when we get you somewhere civilized." Getting Harriet onto the travois was difficult. She tried not to cry out, biting her lip until it bled, but James heard the small sounds of pain she could not quite suppress. Each one felt like a knife to his heart. Hannah watched with wide eyes, still clutching her doll, and James saw the fear there despite her brave silence. "It is all right, little one," he told her. "Your mama is going to be fine. I am going to put you up on my horse now. Her name is Dusty, and she is very gentle." "Have you ever ridden a horse before?" Hannah shook her head. "Well, there is a first time for everything. Up you go." He lifted her into the saddle, and after a moment's hesitation, she gripped the pommel with both hands, her doll tucked under one arm. James mounted behind her, reaching around to hold the reins, and felt her small body relax slightly against his chest. It was a feeling that stirred something long dormant in him, some instinct toward protection and care that went beyond simple human decency. The ride back to his ranch took the better part of 3 hours, and James took it as slowly as he dared, trying to minimize the jolting for Harriet on the travois. Hannah fell asleep against him after the first hour, exhausted beyond endurance, and he adjusted his arm to support her weight. Once, he looked back and saw that Harriet had passed out from the pain and fever, her face slack with unconsciousness, and he urged Dusty to move just a little faster despite the rough ground. The Yates Ranch was not much to look at. Just a sturdy adobe house with a barn and a few outbuildings set in a valley where a creek ran year-round. James had built most of it himself after his father died, expanding the original homestead into something that could support a decent herd of cattle and a few horses. It was lonely work, with only his hired hand Miguel coming by twice a week to help with the heavier chores, but it was his and he was proud of it. Now, though, riding in with a sick woman and her daughter, he saw it through different eyes. The house was clean but spare, furnished with only the necessities. There were no curtains on the windows, no pictures on the walls, nothing to suggest that anyone lived there who cared about such things. It was a bachelor's dwelling, practical and joyless. James carried Hannah inside first, laying her on his own bed where she barely stirred. Then he went back for Harriet, lifting her as gently as he could from the travois. She was lighter than he expected, bird-boned like her daughter, and he could feel the heat of fever radiating from her body through her clothes. He settled her in the bedroom's second, smaller bed, which had belonged to his mother before she passed. It had been years since anyone had slept there, but the linens were clean if a bit musty from disuse. Harriet's eyes fluttered open as he covered her with a quilt his mother had made long ago. "Where?" she whispered. "My ranch. You are safe now. I am going to ride to town for the doctor. There is water beside the bed, and your daughter is right there next to you. I will be back before dark." "Thank you," she breathed, and then sleep or unconsciousness claimed her again. James rode harder than he should have, pushing Dusty to a pace that would have been dangerous in the fading light. Dr. Samuel Hendricks lived above his office in Red Bluff, and James pounded on his door until the old man appeared, spectacles askew and irritation written across his weathered face. "This better be life or death, Yates." "It might be. I found a woman and her child out in the desert. She is fevered and hurt, broken bones, I think, dehydrated for certain." The doctor's expression shifted instantly from annoyance to professional concern. "Give me 5 minutes to gather my bag." They rode back through the darkness, the doctor managing to keep pace despite his 60 years. James told him what he knew of Harriet's story as they traveled, and the old man listened with the careful attention he gave to all his patients' histories. "The widow Morrow," Hendricks mused. "Unfortunate business, but fortunate for her that you came along when you did. Another day in that heat, and she would have been past saving." The words sent a chill through James that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Dr. Hendricks worked through most of the night, setting Harriet's broken ankle and treating her various cuts and abrasions. The fever, he said, was likely from an infected wound on her shoulder that needed cleaning and draining. James stayed nearby, boiling water and tearing clean cloth into bandages, doing whatever the doctor required. Hannah woke once during the night, crying for her mother. James went to her, speaking softly in the darkness until she calmed. He heated some milk on the stove and found a bit of bread that was not too stale, and watched as she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who had been starving. When she finished, she looked up at him with those dark eyes and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Is Mama going to die like Papa?" The question hit James like a physical blow. He knelt down so he was at her eye level, taking her small hands in his. "No, sweetheart. The doctor is making her all better. She is going to be just fine. I promise you that." He should not have made such a promise. He knew better than to make promises he might not be able to keep. But looking into that small face, seeing the fear and hope warring there, he could not do anything else. By dawn, Dr. Hendricks was washing his hands in a basin, his expression cautiously optimistic. "She will live, barring complications. The ankle will heal, though she will need to stay off it for several weeks at least. The fever should break in a day or two now that the infection is being properly treated. She needs rest, food, and water. Can you provide those things?" "Of course," James said without hesitation. The doctor studied him for a long moment. "She is a widow, Yates. That means she is vulnerable. There will be talk if she stays here unchaperoned. Let them talk. I'm not turning her out when she cannot even walk." Hendricks allowed himself a small smile. "Good man. I will check back in a few days. In the meantime, keep her quiet and comfortable. The little one seems healthy enough, just hungry and scared. Feed her regular meals and she should be fine." After the doctor left, James stood in his kitchen as the sun rose, feeling the exhaustion of the sleepless night settling into his bones. He had work to do, cattle to check, fences to mend, but all of that seemed distant and unimportant compared to the woman sleeping in his mother's bed, and the little girl curled up in his own. Hannah found him there when she woke, standing uncertainly in the doorway of the bedroom in her dirty, torn dress. In the morning light, he could see that her dark hair was tangled with burrs and her face was smudged with dirt, but she was beautiful in the way all children are beautiful, with perfect small features and skin that would be golden when it was not gray with exhaustion and fear. "How is your mama?" he asked gently, "Sleeping." "That is good. Sleep helps people heal. Are you hungry?" She nodded, and James set about making breakfast. His cooking was nothing fancy, but he could manage eggs and bacon and biscuits well enough. He watched as Hannah ate, slowly at first and then with increasing enthusiasm, and felt a satisfaction he had not known he could feel just from seeing someone enjoy food he had prepared. "You like it?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "You do not have to call me sir. James is just fine." She considered this seriously. "Mama says I should be polite to grown folks. Your mama is right, but you can be polite and still call me James." After breakfast, he heated water and filled a basin, finding one of his old shirts that would serve as a nightgown for Hannah while he washed her clothes. She was shy about letting him help her clean up, but too young to manage it entirely on her own, so he did his best to preserve her modesty while getting her clean enough that she no longer looked like a desert rat. The transformation was remarkable. Clean and dressed in the too large shirt with the sleeves rolled up, her hair brushed and braided as best he could manage, Hannah looked like a completely different child. She even smiled when she caught sight of herself in the small mirror on his washstand. "Pretty," she said, touching her reflection. "Very pretty," James agreed. "Now, what do you say we check on your mama?" Harriet was awake when they entered the bedroom, though barely. Her eyes found Hannah first, and the relief that washed over her face was profound. "Baby," she whispered. Hannah climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of her mother's injuries, and Harriet pulled her close with her good arm. James saw tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter, and he quietly backed out of the room to give them privacy. He spent the day doing the most essential chores, never straying far from the house in case he was needed. Miguel showed up around noon, took one look at James's tired face and the women's clothes drying on the line, and raised his eyebrows. "You have company, boss." James explained the situation, and Miguel listened with the same unflappable calm he brought to everything. "You need help with them. I need you to spread the word in town that they are here and under my protection. I do not want anyone getting ideas or spreading rumors that might harm Mrs. Morrow's reputation." Miguel nodded slowly. "You are a good man, James Yates, but the doctor is right. There will be talk. I know, but what else can I do?" "Nothing," Miguel said firmly. "You do exactly what you are doing, and anyone who has a problem with it can answer to me." Over the next few days, James fell into a routine he had not known was possible. He would wake early, check on Harriet and Hannah, prepare breakfast for all of them, and then tackle what work he could manage while staying close to the house. Hannah followed him everywhere when her mother was sleeping, a small shadow who watched everything he did with fascinated attention. He taught her how to collect eggs from the chicken coop without frightening the hens, showed her where the creek ran clearest for filling water buckets, and let her help him feed the horses. She was a solemn child, speaking little, but he began to see glimpses of who she might have been before tragedy struck her family. Sometimes she would laugh at the antics of the barn cats, or her face would light up when one of the horses nuzzled her palm looking for treats. Harriet improved slowly. The fever broke on the third day, and though she was still weak and in pain, the doctor pronounced her out of danger. James had moved a chair into the bedroom so he could sit with her in the evenings after Hannah had fallen asleep, and they would talk in quiet voices about nothing in particular. He learned that she had been married to Thomas Morrow, a merchant's son from Pennsylvania who had come west seeking his fortune. They had met in St. Louis, married within 6 months, and headed to the Arizona Territory with dreams of starting a new life. Thomas had been a good man, she said, kind and gentle, but perhaps not well suited for the harshness of the frontier. Still, they had been happy enough, and Hannah had been the light of both their lives. The stage attack had happened so suddenly, there had been no time to prepare or protect themselves. She spoke about it haltingly, and James could see the memories pained her. Thomas had been shot trying to shield her and Hannah, and she had held him as he died, unable to do anything but whisper words of love and comfort. "I am sorry," James said inadequately. "That is a heavy burden to bear." "The worst part is that Hannah saw it all," Harriet said, her voice breaking. "She has not been the same since. She barely speaks anymore. She used to chatter constantly, asking questions about everything, singing little songs she made up. Now she is so quiet, so watchful. It is like she is afraid to be a child anymore." James thought of the small girl sleeping in the next room, of the weight of sorrow she carried in those dark eyes. "Children are resilient," he said. "Give her time and safety and she will find her way back to herself." "How can you know that?" "I cannot," he admitted, "but I have to believe it." "Otherwise, what hope is there?" Harriet looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. "You are a good man, James Yates, better than you probably realize." The words made him uncomfortable, as compliments always did. He changed the subject, asking about her plans once she was well enough to travel. The question seemed to dim something in her eyes. "I suppose I will continue to Silver City as we planned. Thomas's cousin may still take us in, though I will be arriving as a penniless widow instead of a hopeful young family. It is not what I would wish, but I do not have many choices." "You could stay here," James said before he could stop himself. Harriet's eyes widened. "What?" "I mean, not permanently. Not unless you wanted to, but at least until you are fully healed and have had time to decide what you really want to do. There is no need to rush off to Silver City just because that was the original plan." "James, I could not impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary. You have already done so much." "It is not an imposition. Truth is, it has been nice having people in the house again. It gets lonely out here by myself, and Hannah has been a help with the chickens and such." It was a weak excuse and they both knew it, but Harriet did not call him on it. Instead, she studied his face in the lamplight, and he wondered what she saw there. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "Ask me again when I can stand on my own 2 feet." The weeks that followed were some of the strangest and most wonderful of James's life. As Harriet grew stronger, she insisted on contributing to the household despite his protests. She cooked meals that were far superior to anything he had managed on his own, mended clothes that had needed mending for months, and brought a warmth to the house that had been missing since his mother died. Hannah continued to blossom under the steady routine and care. She spoke more often now, asking questions about the animals and the ranch, and sometimes James would catch her singing quietly to herself as she played with her doll. It made something in his chest ache to see her healing, becoming the child she was meant to be. One evening, After Hannah had gone to bed, James and Harriet sat on the porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains. She was using a crutch now to get around, her ankle still too weak to bear her full weight, but the doctor said she was healing remarkably well. "I have been thinking about what you said," Harriet began, not looking at him. "About staying." James's heart began to beat faster, though he kept his voice carefully neutral. "And it is not proper. You know that as well as I do. A widow living alone with an unmarried man, even with my daughter as a chaperone. The talk will be terrible. I do not care about talk, but I have to care. I have Hannah to think about. Her reputation will be mine, and if I am ruined in the eyes of society, so is she." James was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. What if there was a way to make it proper, to stop the talk before it really started? Harriet turned to look at him then, and in the fading light her face was beautiful and uncertain. "What are you suggesting?" "Marriage," he said simply. "A marriage of convenience, if you want to call it that. You and Hannah would have a home and protection, and your reputation would be secure. I would have a family, which is something I have wanted for longer than I care to admit. James, that is not fair to you. To bind yourself to a woman you barely know, who brings nothing to the marriage but herself and her child." "You bring everything I need," he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "These past weeks, having you and Hannah here, it has made me realize what I have been missing. I am not asking you to love me, Harriet. I know your heart still belongs to your late husband. I am just asking you to let me take care of you and Hannah, to give us all a chance at something good." Harriet's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" "A purpose," he said honestly. "Someone to work for besides myself, the sound of voices in my home, the chance to see Hannah grow up happy and safe. That is more than enough. You deserve someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. Maybe someday I will have that. Maybe we both will. But for now, this could work. We could make it work if you are willing to try." She was silent for so long that he thought she would refuse. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and delicate in his rough palm, but her grip was firm. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I will marry you, James Yates, and I will do my best to be a good wife to you, even if I cannot promise love. That is all I ask." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Red Bluff, with Dr. Hendricks and Miguel standing as witnesses. Harriet wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to James's mother, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Hannah stood between them holding a bouquet of wildflowers that James had picked that morning. The Reverend gave them a knowing look, but asked no uncomfortable questions, and if the few townspeople who attended whispered among themselves, James did not hear it. He was too focused on Harriet's face as she spoke her vows, on the slight tremor in her voice that betrayed her nervousness, on the way her hand felt in his when he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. When it was done and they were declared man and wife, he kissed her gently on the cheek, not wanting to presume more than she was ready to give. But she turned her head at the last moment so that their lips met, just briefly, and he saw something flash in her eyes that might have been the beginning of something deeper than convenience. They went home to the ranch that afternoon as a family, and James felt a contentment settle over him that he had not known was possible. That night, after Hannah was asleep, he and Harriet stood awkwardly in the bedroom that would now be theirs to share. "I can sleep in the other room," James offered. "I do not want you to feel pressured into anything you are not ready for." Harriet shook her head. "We are married now, properly married. I will not have people saying we have a false marriage just for show, but James, I need time. I need to know you not just as the man who saved us, but as my husband. Can you be patient with me? I can be as patient as you need." he promised. They lay down together that night, careful not to touch, and James stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathing slowly even out as she fell asleep. It was strange to share his bed after so many years alone, but it was a good kind of strange, full of possibilities he had not allowed himself to imagine before. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Summer faded into fall, and the Arizona heat gave way to cooler temperatures that made working outside less brutal. Harriet threw herself into making the house a home, sewing curtains for the windows and planting a small garden near the kitchen. Hannah started speaking in full sentences again, her natural curiosity reasserting itself as she explored every corner of the ranch. James taught her to ride on Dusty, holding her securely in front of him until she was confident enough to manage the gentle mare on her own. He showed her how to whistle for the dogs and how to tell when a hen was about to lay. She followed him through his daily chores with endless questions, and he found himself answering them with a patience he had not known he possessed. One afternoon, they were checking the fence line together when Hannah asked, "Can I call you Papa?" James's hand stilled on the wire he was mending. "What does your mama say?" "She says it is up to you. She says you are my papa now, even if you did not start out that way." He looked down at her small face, so serious and hopeful, and felt his heart crack open in a way he had not expected. "I would be honored if you called me Papa." She smiled then, the first truly carefree smile he had seen from her, and threw her arms around his waist. "I love you, Papa." The words hit him like a thunderbolt, powerful and unexpected. He knelt down and hugged her back, his eyes stinging with tears he was not ashamed of. "I love you too, little one, more than you could possibly know." That night, he told Harriet about the conversation, and she listened with a soft smile on her face. "She has been asking me for weeks if it would be all right. I think she was afraid you might say no." "I could never say no to her," James said, "or to you." Harriet looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something she had not done since their wedding kiss. She leaned forward and kissed him, properly this time, with intention and warmth. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. "I thought it was time you knew that this marriage is not just convenience for me anymore," she said quietly. "I have been falling in love with you, James Yates, a little bit more each day. I tried not to, out of loyalty to Thomas's memory, but I cannot help it. You are everything a man should be, and I am grateful every day that you found us in that caboose." James felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "Harriet, I have loved you since the first week you were here. I just did not want to rush you or make you feel obligated." "I do not feel obligated. I feel blessed." That night, their marriage became a true one in every sense, and James discovered that happiness could be even sweeter than he had imagined. As fall turned to winter, Miguel helped James drag the old caboose from the abandoned railroad spur back to the ranch. It was hard work, requiring horses and ropes and more cursing than James liked to admit to, but eventually they had it positioned in the meadow beyond the barn. Harriet had suggested it one evening, saying that Hannah might enjoy having the place where they had been found turned into something happy, instead of something frightening. James and Miguel spent weeks repairing the old car, replacing the broken windows and reinforcing the structure. They painted it bright red again, installed a small stove for heat, and built sturdy steps up to the door. Inside, Harriet sewed cushions for the benches and hung cheerful curtains. They furnished it with a small table and chairs, some of Hannah's toys and books that Harriet ordered from a catalog. When it was finished, Hannah could barely contain her excitement. She ran from one end of the caboose to the other, touching everything, chattering about how it would be her special playhouse. James stood in the doorway watching her, Harriet beside him with her arm linked through his. She does not even remember being afraid here anymore, Harriet said softly. All she sees now is possibility. That is how it should be, James said. Bad places can become good ones if you fill them with the right memories. Winter in the Arizona Territory was mild compared to what Harriet had known in the East, but the nights grew cold enough that they needed to keep the fires burning. James would come in from the evening chores to find Harriet and Hannah together in the kitchen, cooking dinner or reading stories, and the warmth of those domestic scenes never failed to move him. Hannah truly made the caboose her own. On warmer days, she would spend hours there with her dolls and her books, creating elaborate games that James and Harriet were occasionally invited to join. She decided it was a grand train traveling across the country, and she was the conductor responsible for keeping everyone safe and on schedule. Sometimes Harriet would pack a picnic lunch, and they would eat in the caboose as a family, listening to Hannah's imaginative stories about where the train was headed. James found himself looking forward to these moments more than anything else, these pockets of pure joy that seemed impossible to believe were his life now. Spring came, and with it, the news that Harriet was expecting a child. James received the information with a mixture of elation and terror. He had never been a father to an infant before, and the responsibility of it weighed heavily on him. "You will be wonderful," Harriet assured him, laughing at his worried expression. "You are already wonderful with Hannah, and this will be no different. Hannah was 3 years old when I met her. She could talk and walk and feed herself. A baby is completely different. Then you will learn, just like every other father in the world has to learn. We will figure it out together." Hannah was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a big sister. She talked constantly about all the things she would teach the baby, all the games they would play together in the caboose. James built a cradle from oak wood, carving small flowers into the headboard with more care than he had ever applied to any task. The baby arrived in late autumn, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs and his father's dark hair. They named him Jacob Thomas Yates, honoring James while also remembering Harriet's first husband. It felt right to James, this acknowledgement that their family had not erased what came before but had built upon it. Jacob was a demanding infant, and those first months were exhausting in ways James had not anticipated. But they were also filled with moments of piercing sweetness. The first time his son gripped his finger with a tiny fist, the first smile that was not just gas, the sound of Harriet singing lullabies in the night, all of it wove together into a tapestry of contentment James had never imagined possible. Hannah was a devoted big sister, always wanting to help with the baby. She would sit beside the cradle for hours, talking to Jacob in a gentle voice, showing him her toys and telling him stories about the ranch and the animals. It was clear she had completely recovered from the trauma of losing her father, transformed by love and security into the bright, happy child she was always meant to be. One evening, when Jacob was about 6 months old, James came in from the barn to find Harriet in tears at the kitchen table. He rushed to her side, fear gripping his heart. "What is wrong? Is it the baby, Hannah?" She shook her head, laughing through her tears. "No, everyone is fine. I am sorry. These are happy tears, I promise." "Happy tears?" He sat down beside her, bewildered. "I was just sitting here feeding Jacob, watching Hannah play with her dolls on the floor, and I thought about everything we have been through to get to this moment. And I realized that I am completely, utterly happy. More than I ever thought I could be after Thomas died. And I felt guilty for being happy, and then I felt sad that I felt guilty, and then all these tears just started coming and I could not stop them." James pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried against his chest. "You are allowed to be happy, Harriet. Thomas would want that for you." He would want his daughter to grow up in a loving home with a father who adores her and a mother who has found peace. I know. I know that in my head, but my heart still needed to hear you say it. Then I will say it as many times as you need to hear it. You deserve every bit of happiness this life can give you. You and Hannah and Jacob, you are my whole world. Everything I do for you. And I am grateful every single day that you were in that caboose when I found you, that you said yes when I asked you to marry me, that you gave our family a chance. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red but her smile genuine. I love you, James Yates. I love you with everything I am. You need to know that. I do know it. And I love you the same way. Always have, always will. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Hannah grew tall and clever, taking on more responsibilities around the property as she got older. She learned to help James with the cattle, proving herself as capable as any hired hand. The caboose remained her special place, though as she matured it transformed from a playhouse into a reading room and later into a quiet retreat where she could think and dream. Jacob grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere and got into every kind of mischief a ranch could offer. He was fearless in a way that sometimes gave Harriet heart palpitations, climbing trees and riding horses at ages when most children were still learning to be cautious. 2 years after Jacob's birth, Harriet gave James twin daughters, Sarah and Emma, who looked so much alike that even their parents sometimes had trouble telling them apart in those early months. The house that had once seemed too empty now rang with voices and laughter, with the chaos and joy of a large family. James expanded the ranch to support his growing household, building additional rooms onto the house and hiring more help with the cattle. Miguel eventually married and built his own small house on the property, and his wife Maria became Harriet's closest friend and most trusted helper with the children. The caboose continued to be the children's favorite place to play. James installed lanterns so they could use it even after dark, and Harriet kept it stocked with toys and books appropriate for various ages. It became a place where neighborhood children would sometimes gather, and Harriet would bring out cookies and milk, turning it into an impromptu social hall. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Harriet by having the caboose completely refurbished again, this time adding curtained windows, comfortable furniture, and a small but functional kitchen area. He had a sign painted above the door that read Harriet's Haven, and when she saw it she cried all over again. It is too much, she protested, even as she explored every corner of the transformed space. It is not nearly enough for everything you have given me, James countered. You took a broken-down cowboy living alone in the desert and gave him a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up excited every morning. This is just a caboose. You gave me a life. Hannah, now 13 and growing into a lovely young woman, stood beside them with Jacob and the twins. Tell them the story again, Mama, she urged. Tell them about how Papa found us. It had become a family tradition, this retelling. Harriet would gather the children around and tell them about that desperate time in the desert, when she thought all hope was lost, and then a cowboy on a buckskin horse appeared like something out of a fairy tale. She always emphasized the parts about James's kindness, his patience, the way he had cared for them without asking for anything in return. The children never tired of hearing it, perhaps because it was the origin story of their family, the beginning of everything they knew and loved. As she told the story this time, James watched his family gathered in the caboose, surrounded by the warm glow of the lanterns, and felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was what life was meant to be, not just surviving but thriving. Not just existing, but but loving and being loved in return. That night, after the children were all asleep, James and Harriet walked back to the house hand in hand under a sky full of stars. The Arizona night was cool and clear, the kind of night that made you feel small and significant all at once. "Do you ever regret it?" Harriet asked quietly. "Stopping that day when you heard Hannah crying, taking on the responsibility of two strangers who had nothing to offer you?" James stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Regret it? Harriet, finding you and Hannah was the best thing that ever happened to me. Every good moment in my life since that day can be traced back to the choice I made to investigate that abandoned caboose. If I had ridden past, if I had ignored the sound, I would have missed out on everything that makes life worth living. You, Hannah, Jacob, the twins, all of this. It would have passed me by and I never would have known what I was missing. So no, I do not regret it for a single moment. Not even when the twins are both screaming at 2 in the morning, and Jacob has managed to get himself stuck in a tree, and Hannah is giving you that look that says she thinks she knows better than you do about something," he laughed. "Not even then. Especially not then, because those are the moments that prove this is real, that I did not just imagine all of this." She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "I am so glad you heard us that day. So glad you were the kind of man who would stop to help instead of riding on by. So glad you had the patience to let me heal and the wisdom to see that we could be a family." "I am the glad one," James said, kissing the top of her head. "Every single day I am grateful." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms under the stars, while in the distance the caboose sat quietly in the meadow, a monument to second chances and the power of compassion to transform lives. As the years continued to unfold, the Yates Ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its quality cattle, but for the warmth of its hospitality. Travelers who stopped by were always fed and given a place to stay if needed. Children from less fortunate families found themselves invited to play in the famous caboose Playhouse, where they were treated to the same kindness and care as the Yates children. Harriet established a small school in Red Bluff, teaching children whose families could not afford to send them to the larger towns. James supported her fully in this endeavor, even building a small schoolhouse on the edge of their property where she could hold classes. Hannah, when she was old enough, became her mother's assistant teacher, showing a natural gift for working with younger children. Jacob eventually grew into a man who shared his father's love for ranching, but also his mother's compassion for those in need. He would often bring home strays, both animal and human, much to his parents' amused exasperation. The twins developed their own distinct personalities as they grew, Sarah becoming interested in medicine after watching Dr. Hendricks work, while Emma showed a talent for art, painting scenes of ranch life that eventually caught the attention of galleries in larger cities. The caboose, that original symbol of rescue and transformation, remained a constant in their lives. Even as the children grew older and needed it less for play, it served as a gathering place for the family. They would sometimes eat Sunday dinners there in the warmer months, or James and Harriet would retreat there when they needed a moment of quiet away from the bustling household. On Hannah's 18th birthday, she asked if she could spend the night in the caboose, the way she had when she was younger. James and Harriet agreed, understanding her need to connect with that younger version of herself before she stepped fully into adulthood. The next morning, she came to breakfast with tears in her eyes and hugged both her parents tightly. "I remember it now," she said. "I mean, I have always remembered being there, but last night I really remembered how scared I was, how sure I was that Mama was going to die and I would be all alone." And then you came, Papa. You saved us. You saved me too, James said, his own voice thick with emotion. Both of you did. You gave me a reason to be the man I always wanted to be. Hannah pulled back to look at him seriously. I want you to know that I have never, not for one single moment, thought of you as anything other than my real father. Thomas Morrow gave me life, but you taught me how to live it. James had to excuse himself from the table, overcome with emotion. Harriet found him a few minutes later on the porch, wiping his eyes. That girl is going to be the death of me, he said, trying to smile. Too many feelings for one old cowboy to handle. You are not old, Harriet said, sliding her arm around his waist. And you are exactly the father she needed. We are all exactly what we needed to be for each other. As they stood there together, watching the sun rise over their land, James reflected on how much life had changed since that day he heard crying from an abandoned caboose. He had been a lonely bachelor then, going through the motions of life without real purpose or joy. Now he was surrounded by love, by children who called him Papa, by a wife who had become the center of his universe. The cattle still needed tending, the fences still needed mending, the daily work of the ranch continued as it always had. But now, it all meant something more. Every fence he repaired made the ranch safer for his children to explore. Every calf he helped birth added to the legacy he would leave them. Every sunrise he watched was more beautiful because he could share it with Harriet. More years passed, and the children began to make their own ways in the world. Hannah married a schoolteacher from Phoenix and started her own family, though she visited the ranch often and always made sure her children spent time in the old caboose. Jacob took over more and more of the ranch operations, working side by side with his father and eventually bringing home a bride of his own, a rancher's daughter from up north who fit into the family as if she had always been there. The twins went off to school, Sarah to study medicine and Emma to study art, but they always came home for holidays and important occasions. The ranch was the anchor that held them all together, the place where they knew they belonged. When James was 55, Dr. Hendricks finally retired, and Sarah returned to Red Bluff to take over his practice. She built a small clinic on the main street and quickly became beloved in the community, just as the old doctor had been. Her visits to the ranch were frequent, checking on her aging parents with a professional eye that sometimes amused and sometimes annoyed them. "I am fine," James would protest when she insisted on listening to his heart. "Still as strong as an ox." "Humor your daughter," Sarah would reply with the same stubborn set to her jaw that he recognized from his own mirror. "Besides, Mama would kill me if I did not make sure you were taking care of yourself." Emma's paintings began to sell well, and she had exhibitions in San Francisco and even New York. But she never forgot her roots, and many of her most acclaimed works featured scenes from the ranch, including a series of paintings depicting the caboose in different seasons that became her signature collection. Through it all, James and Harriet remained the center around which the family orbited. Their love, which had started as an arrangement of convenience born from desperate circumstances, had deepened into something that everyone who knew them recognized as rare and precious. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them by organizing a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors from all over the territory came to mark the occasion, filling the house and grounds with laughter and music. The caboose had been decorated with flowers and ribbons, and a banner hung across its side reading, "25 Years of Love." As the party wound down and the guests began to depart, James found himself standing in the caboose with Harriet, much as they had on their 10th anniversary. But this time they were older, grayer, with lines on their faces earned through years of laughter and occasional tears. "Can you believe it has been 25 years?" Harriet asked, leaning against him. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you found us here, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I prefer to think we have always been together," James said. "We just did not meet until 1885. She laughed, the sound as lovely to him now as it had been when he first heard it all those years ago. "That is very romantic for a cowboy who claims he does not have a poetic bone in his body. You bring it out of me. You always have." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching through the windows as their children and grandchildren played in the meadow. There were 5 grandchildren now, with another on the way, and James knew that each one of them loved this old caboose as much as Hannah had when she first claimed it as her playhouse. "We should tell them the story," Harriet said suddenly. "All of them. Make sure they understand where this all came from." So they called the family together one last time before everyone dispersed, gathering them all in and around the caboose. The older grandchildren sat on the steps while the younger ones climbed into their parents' laps. James and Harriet stood in the doorway, and together they told the story. James spoke of that day in 1885 when he had been trailing a wayward calf and heard a sound that changed his life forever. Harriet described the desperation of those days waiting in the abandoned caboose, hoping against hope that someone would come. They told of the long ride back to the ranch, of the doctor's visit, of the awkward early days of learning to live together. Hannah, with her own children now, added her memories of waking up in a strange house and being frightened until she saw the kindness in James's eyes. She described the first time he had let her help with the chickens, the first time she had called him Papa, the slow process of healing that had taken place in the safety of his care. "The point is," James said, looking around at all the faces of the people he loved most in the world, "that life can change in an instant. One choice, one decision to stop instead of riding on, one willingness to help someone who needs it, and suddenly everything is different. This family exists because I heard a cry in the desert and chose to investigate, and every good thing in my life stems from that one choice. But it is not just about the choice to help," Harriet added. "It is about what we did with that help after it was given. James offered us safety and protection, but we had to choose to accept it, to trust him, to be willing to build something new from the ashes of what we had lost. It took both of us being brave in different ways." The youngest grandchild, barely 3 years old, spoke up in a clear voice. "What happened to the bad men who hurt you?" It was a question no one had asked before, at least not in James's hearing. He exchanged a glance with Harriet, and she nodded slightly, giving him permission to tell the truth. "I do not know," James admitted. "The sheriff's office investigated, but they were never caught. Sometimes that is how life works. The bad guys do not always get punished the way we think they should. But you know what? In the end, they did not win. They took from your grandmother, but they could not destroy her. She survived, she built a new life, and she raised a beautiful family. That is the real victory." As the sun set and the family slowly dispersed to their various homes and guest rooms, James and Harriet remained in the caboose, neither quite ready to leave. This place held so much history, so many memories layered on top of each other like sediment forming rock. "You think we should tell them the whole truth someday?" Harriet asked quietly. "About how our marriage started as an arrangement, about how I agreed to marry you before I loved you." James considered it. "Maybe when they are older, when they can understand that sometimes the greatest loves do not start with lightning bolts and instant passion. Sometimes they start with kindness and grow into something deeper than either person could have imagined." I did not know it was possible to love someone as much as I love you, Harriet said, turning to look at him in the dim light. I thought I understood love because of what I had with Thomas. But this is different, deeper, richer. Maybe because we built it ourselves, brick by brick, day by day. I feel the same way. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Harriet Yates. You and all those babies you gave me, she laughed. Those babies are grown now with babies of their own. We are old, James. Speak for yourself. I am in my prime. Your prime was 20 years ago. Now you are just stubborn. They bantered like this often, the easy teasing of two people who knew each other so well that words were almost unnecessary. But tonight, the joking faded into a comfortable silence as they held each other in the place where their story had begun. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both great and small. The automobile came to Red Bluff, though James stubbornly insisted that horses were more reliable. Electricity was installed in town and eventually made its way to the ranch, though it took Harriet some time to trust that the wires would not burn the house down. The world beyond the Arizona territory changed too. Wars and progress marching forward whether the Yates family was ready or not. But through it all, the ranch remained a constant, a place where values of kindness, hard work, and family were paramount. James and Harriet aged together with the grace of two people who had nothing left to prove and everything to be grateful for. They moved more slowly, complained about the weather affecting their joints, and took afternoon naps that would have been unthinkable in their younger years. But they still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good morning and good night, still found joy in the simple pleasures of being together. The caboose, weathered but still sturdy, became a symbol for the entire family. When grandchildren were fighting, they were sent to the caboose to work it out. When someone needed space to think or pray, the caboose was there. It had been many things over the years: a refuge, a playhouse, a thinking spot, a romantic retreat. But most of all, it was a reminder that beautiful things could grow from desperate beginnings. When James was 73, he suffered a bad fall from a horse and was confined to bed rest for several weeks. It was the first time in his life he had been truly incapacitated, and it frustrated him to no end. Harriet, now 71 herself, appointed herself his primary caretaker, despite Sarah's protests that trained nurses should be brought in. "I have been caring for this man for almost 40 years, Harriet said firmly. "I am not stopping now just because he is being particularly cranky about it." "I am not cranky," James protested from the bed. "I am justifiably annoyed at being treated like an invalid. You broke 3 ribs and your collarbone. You are an invalid, at least temporarily. Now stop arguing and drink your broth." Despite his complaints, James secretly loved having Harriet fuss over him. She would sit beside his bed for hours, reading to him or just talking about the goings-on around the ranch. Sometimes she would nap in the chair, and he would watch her sleep, marveling that this woman had chosen to spend her life with him. One afternoon, when they were alone, he reached for her hand. "Harriet, I need to tell you something." She sat up straighter, alert to the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" "If anything happens to me, if I do not recover from this, or if something else takes me down the road, I want you to know that every day with you has been a gift. You made my life mean something. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to be better than I was. And I am grateful for every single moment we have had together." Tears filled her eyes. "James Yates, you stop talking like that right now. You are going to be fine. You are too stubborn to let a little fall from a horse keep you down. I hope you are right. But just in case I am wrong, I needed you to hear it. You are the love of my life, Harriet, the only one I have ever had and the only one I will ever need." She bent down and kissed him, her tears falling on his face. "And you are mine. Now hurry up and heal so we can argue about something less depressing." He did heal, though it took longer than either of them would have liked. By the time he was back on his feet, winter had given way to spring, and the desert was covered in the brief bloom of wildflowers that only came after the rare wet winters. They celebrated his recovery with a family dinner in the caboose, crowded though it was with all their children, grandchildren, and now even a few great-grandchildren. The noise was tremendous, the chaos complete, and James looked around at all of it with profound satisfaction. "What are you thinking about?" Harriet asked, leaning close to be heard over the din. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived, that I could have ridden past that day, could have ignored the sound of crying, could have convinced myself it was not my problem. And then I would have missed all of this, every bit of it. The thought is almost unbearable. But you did not ride past, you stopped, you helped, and that has made all the difference." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple, "all the difference in the world." As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James stood outside the caboose watching his family. 3 generations of children playing in the meadow, their laughter carrying on the warm spring air. His children, grown now and with gray in their own hair, standing in clusters discussing the important matters of their lives. And Harriet beside him, still beautiful despite the lines that time had carved on her face, still the center of his world after all these years. The caboose, that abandoned train car that had nearly been a tomb, stood behind them full of light and love. It had been transformed, just as they all had been transformed by the power of compassion and the willingness to see possibility in the midst of despair. "Tell me the story again," James said suddenly, surprising Harriet. "The whole story from your perspective. I want to remember it the way you do." So she told him, her voice soft and full of memory. She described the terror of the stage attack, the agony of watching Thomas die, the desperate flight through the desert carrying Hannah. She spoke of the moment she saw the caboose and thought it might be their salvation or their grave. She described the days of waiting, the fever that made everything blurry and strange, and then the sound of boots on gravel and a voice calling out, gentle and concerned. "I thought you might be a dream," she admitted, "or maybe an angel. You seemed too good to be real, this cowboy who appeared out of nowhere and asked for nothing but offered everything." "I was no angel," James said, "just a lonely man who stumbled onto something precious and had enough sense to hold on tight. You were exactly what we needed, what I needed. Someone strong enough to protect us, but gentle enough to let me heal at my own pace. Someone patient enough to let love grow naturally instead of forcing it. Someone who could love another man's child as his own and never make her feel like she was anything less than your daughter." They stood in silence for a moment, each lost in their own memories of that time so long ago. Then one of the great-grandchildren came running up, tugging on James's pant leg. "Great-granddad, tell us about the cowboys and Indians." James laughed and scooped the child up. "I was a cowboy, little one. Still am, as far as I am concerned. A hero cowboy who saved great-grandma. I do not know about hero. I just did what any decent person would do." But as he looked at Harriet and saw the love shining in her eyes, he thought that maybe the child was not so far wrong. Not because he had done anything particularly heroic, but because he had recognized a chance to make a difference and taken it. And from that one choice, this entire beautiful, chaotic, loving family had grown. That night, after everyone had finally gone home or to bed, James and Harriet sat on their porch in the rocking chairs James had built years ago. The night was clear and cool, the stars bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote sang to the moon. "How many years has it been?" James asked, though he knew the answer. 38 years since you found us. Almost 37 since we married. Not long enough. I want at least another 38. Harriet reached over and took his hand. "I will take whatever we get as long as we get it together." They sat like that until sleep began to claim them. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting from a moment of compassion. The caboose stood silent in the meadow, a monument to the day their lives changed forever. And all around them the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of night. Years later, when James was 80 and Harriet 78, they would often walk out to the caboose in the evenings, moving slowly but steadily, still holding hands. They would sit inside and remember, not just the day they met, but all the days that had followed. The challenges they had overcome, the joys they had shared, the family they had built together. The caboose had been repainted many times over the years, repaired and maintained by children and grandchildren who understood its significance. Inside, photographs covered the walls, wedding pictures, baby pictures, family gatherings spanning decades. It was a timeline of love, visual proof that from desperate beginnings something beautiful could grow. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for what would be the last great celebration of James and Harriet's life together. The caboose was the centerpiece of the celebration, decorated with gold ribbons to mark the golden anniversary. James, now walking with a cane but still sharp-minded and sharp-tongued, gave a speech that had everyone alternately laughing and crying. He talked about the day he found his wife and daughter, about the decision that changed everything, about the years of love that had followed. "I started out a lonely cowboy with a simple life," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. "I had land and cattle and a roof over my head, but I did not have purpose. I did not have love. And then God saw fit to lead me to an abandoned caboose where two desperate souls waited for rescue. I thought I was saving them, but the truth is they saved me. They gave me everything worth having in this life." He turned to Harriet, who sat beside him with tears streaming down her face. "This woman took a chance on a stranger. She married me when she barely knew me, trusted me with her daughter and eventually with more children. She turned a house into a home and a lonely man into a husband and father. She has been my partner, my love, my best friend for 50 years, and if I had 50 more, I would count myself blessed to spend them all with her." The celebration lasted well into the night, but eventually James and Harriet found themselves alone in the caboose once more, as they had so many times over the years. The party continued outside, but here in their special place it was quiet and peaceful. 50 years, Harriet marveled. "Can you believe it? Some days yes, some days no, but I am grateful for every one of them. Even the hard ones, the years when money was tight and we were not sure we could hold onto the ranch, the times when the children were sick and we were both frightened out of our minds. The arguments and the disagreements and the moments when we frustrated each other to no end. Especially those times," James said firmly. "Because those are the times that proved our love was real and strong enough to weather anything. Any fool can be in love when everything is easy. It takes something special to stay in love when life gets hard." They sat together in the caboose as the sounds of celebration drifted in from outside. Their bodies were old and tired, but their hearts were as full as they had ever been. They had built a legacy of love, a family that stretched across generations, all because one cowboy had chosen to investigate a cry in the wilderness. 2 years later, James passed away peacefully in his sleep, Harriet beside him as she had been for over 5 decades. The entire territory mourned him, for he had been a good man and a good neighbor. always willing to help those in need just as he had helped a desperate widow and her daughter so many years ago. Harriet lived another 3 years, cared for by her children and surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren who adored her. She spent her final summer in the caboose, moved there at her request so she could be in the place where her second life had begun. Hannah, now a grandmother herself, sat with her mother in those final weeks, and they talked about everything and nothing. They reminisced about Thomas, keeping his memory alive even after all these years. They talked about James and the incredible life he had given them. They spoke of the family that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. "You have any regrets, Mama?" Hannah asked one afternoon. Harriet thought for a long moment. "Only one. I wish I had told your father Thomas that I loved him one more time before he died. I wish I had known those were our last moments together, but I do not regret anything that came after. James gave us a beautiful life, and I loved him with everything I had. I hope that wherever Thomas is, he knows that and approves." "I think he does," Hannah said softly. "I think he is grateful that you and I were cared for, that we were loved, that we had a chance to thrive instead of just survive. And I know James is waiting for you, probably complaining about being kept waiting." Harriet laughed, the sound weak but genuine. "That sounds like him." She passed away 3 days later, quietly and peacefully, with all her children present. They laid her to rest beside James in the cemetery in Red Bluff, under a headstone that read "Beloved Wife, Mother, and Grandmother." She brought light to all who knew her. The ranch passed to Jacob, who ran it with the same care and compassion his father had shown. The caboose remained in the meadow, maintained by the family as a memorial to James and Harriet and the love story that had begun there. Years turned into decades, and the story of the cowboy who found a woman and child in an abandoned caboose became family legend, told and retold to new generations. The caboose itself became something of a landmark, with people occasionally stopping by to see the place where such a remarkable story had unfolded. The Yates family continued to grow and spread, but they always came back to the ranch for important occasions. They would gather in and around the caboose, now lovingly preserved as it had been in James and Harriet's time, and tell the story to children who had never known their great-great-grandparents, but who understood that something special had happened in this place. The caboose stood as a testament to the truth that one act of kindness can ripple forward through time, creating waves that touch lives not yet born. It reminded them all that compassion matters, that choosing to help instead of passing by can change the world in ways we cannot predict. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right through the canyon, some family members swore they could hear the echo of children's laughter coming from the caboose, along with the murmur of two voices talking softly, full of love and contentment. Whether it was memory or something more, it brought comfort to know that the love between James and Harriet had been so strong that perhaps some essence of it remained, blessing the place where their story began. The red caboose stood in the meadow for generations, a symbol of rescue and transformation, of love that grew from desperate circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. It reminded everyone who saw it that endings can become beginnings, that tragedy can be transformed into triumph, and that sometimes the greatest love stories start not with passion, but with simple human kindness. And so the story lived on, passed down through the years, a reminder that one choice, one moment of compassion, one decision to stop instead of riding on can change everything. Not just for one person or even two, but for generations yet to come. The cowboy who found a woman and child in an abandoned caboose could never have imagined the legacy he was creating in that moment. He thought he was just helping people in need. but he was actually planting the seeds of a family tree that would grow tall and strong, providing shelter and shade for countless souls. That was the real magic of the story. Not that James had been a hero, though he had been heroic in his quiet way. Not that Harriet had been exceptionally brave, though she had shown remarkable courage. But that two ordinary people, thrown together by circumstance, had chosen love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over despair. And from those choices, a beautiful life had grown, full of children and grandchildren, of laughter and tears, of ordinary moments made extraordinary by the presence of love. The caboose remained, red and proud in its meadow, a playhouse for children and a monument to love. And though James and Harriet were gone, their story lived on, inspiring new generations to be kind, to help those in need, to understand that the greatest gifts in life often come from the most unexpected places. In the end, that was the legacy they left behind. Not wealth or fame, but love. Love that had started in an abandoned train car in the Arizona desert, and had grown to encompass more people and more years than either of them could have dreamed possible on that fateful day in 1885.